The security cluster has come under fire for its response to the recent violence in KwaZulu-Natal and Gauteng. Add to that, a president who's been contradicted by his ministers in public about the nature of the unrest. Now, this has resulted in growing calls for some members of the executive to be fired. Joining me now is the House Chairperson in the National Assembly, Cedric Frolick, who speaks to us from Gqeberha. Mr. Frolick, thank you very much for joining us. And I want to start with what you have been quoted as been saying in the last few days, and that is that the MPs who have been up and about, this include MPs from the police, defense and those who sit in the intelligence structures, they are going to be putting together a report after the various site visits that they have undertaken. Firstly, what's the overall impression of these members after the mayhem that we saw in the past 2 weeks?
Well, good morning to you, Colin. Good morning to your viewers. It was absolute disappointment from those committees who went to KwaZulu-Natal and Gauteng to witness the destruction that has been caused by the events that played out over the last 2 weeks or so. And what it was also striking is the fact that the security services was not really in a position to tell us why they could not detect this type of action or looming action that was going to take place. So that is very concerning to us, and this led, unfortunately, to a number of people in the country, in those two provinces, losing their lives due to the violence and the looting that occurred. And we want to convey our condolences to the families of those South Africans who have lost their life. May their souls rest in peace.
Yeah. What is the aim, therefore, Mr. Frolick, of the proposed inquiry by Parliament, and what time frames are we looking at in terms of its conclusions?
What is important for us is to get to the bottom of really what happened prior to these events, what information was available to the security services, what played out during the events that unfolded. You must be reminded that it took almost more than 48 hours to see the visible response of especially the South African police on the ground in those two provinces. And then afterwards, where are the perpetrators? Have all of them been arrested? Have their networks been exposed? And we need to get to the bottom of it, because these are questions that is lurking in the minds of ordinary South Africans who want to carry on with their daily livelihoods.
Mr. Frolick, the intelligence failures, the subsequent public spats by the ministers on this very matter, that cannot be underplayed. Now, someone listening to you will say, yeah, you're talking tough, you're talking the kind of language that South Africans want to hear. But if you were playing your role, these ministers we are talking about, the very ones who have been contradicting their president in public, they would not be sitting in their jobs today, would they? Well,
Collie, what is important for us is that, and we said we don't want to add confusion that was caused by the members of the executive. We expected from the members of the executive, who are all sitting in the same security clusters and who are all part of the same cabinet, to have come forward with a coherent message that have given confidence to the people of South Africa that indeed the security services are in charge. Unfortunately, that did not happen, and that will form part of the scope of the work that must be done by the Portfolio Committee on Police in the National Assembly and the Committee in the National Council of Provinces. They will work jointly, but just yesterday we approved an application from the Joint Standing Committee on Intelligence to also conduct an inquiry so that they can deal and focus on those security matters, including, you can recall there were rumors going around that there's former members of the intelligence agencies who were apparently involved in the instigation of some of these incidents that occurred. And that is very, very worrying. And unless we get to the bottom of it and drastic action is taken, then we may sit with a repeat of what has occurred in the future. May I also add that members of the executive served at the pleasure and at the invitation of the President, and that is the call that the President must make.
Indeed, I agree with you. Yes, the National Assembly perhaps could add pressure. In your view, I mean, you've been quoted as saying there needs to be drastic measures, drastic action should be taken. Are you saying that someone should be fired as a result of what happened? 300 people have lost their lives, over 300, I should say.
Kole, I don't want to preempt the outcome of the work of the committees that have now been set up to look into the events, including the intelligence matters as well as the policing matters. And that should lead us to a natural conclusion, and then it will allow us to be in a position to make pronouncements on the matter and to report to the House. But I really don't want to preempt the outcome of whatever these committees may hear from the relevant ministers and also from the heads of the departments.
But this is just the problem, Mr. Frolick, is it not? This is just the problem with the National Assembly. And that is why, over time, your role as an oversight body, it has been said to be weak, and in most instances, you have failed to hold people accountable. What am I talking about? Can I give you one singular example? Has anyone been held accountable in the Defense Ministry for importing illegally a Cuban drug into this country, which has now cost millions of rand? That drug, when I last spoke to the outgoing Army General, he said to me that it's being kept in some warehouse somewhere. Has anyone ever been held accountable for that?
Alcohol, I don't have the details of what you are referring to as far as the Cuban drug and the import thereof. The Joint Standing Committee on Defence chairpersons will be better in a position to give a response to that. However, to say what we're currently dealing with is a process that will be transparent, it will be open to the public, it will go to not only the National Assembly, both houses of Parliament are involved in this process. And ultimately, the recommendations that must be made by the National Assembly and the National Council of Provinces will have to be implemented, and that will require executive action from the individual cabinet ministers or the cabinet collectively under the leadership of the President.
This happened last year, Mr. Frolick. It happened last year. So far, you're telling me that you don't have details on it. Fine. Why should South Africans have any confidence in the inquiry that is about to ensue? Because what you are doing now is what some people interpret as making yourselves look very busy while actually nothing is going to happen.
Well, Kole, let me start at the beginning of what you said. If you would have told me, which you haven't done, that you want specific details on the Cuban drug issue, and then I would have received the necessary information. Ordinarily, we oversee up to 40 different portfolio and standing committees at the same time. So I think your question is unfair. Secondly, we've laid out the process in terms of what will take place and what will happen, and there is a commitment and the political will is there to see to it that it plays out towards its natural conclusion. And if it is that those committees come to certain conclusions that certain people must be relieved of their positions, so be it. Ultimately, if it involves members of the cabinet, it is a decision that the President needs to take.
Mr. Frolick, I want to continue this conversation. I'm not going to let you go just yet. So please, I beg for your indulgence. Let's take a short breather. When we return, we're going to talk about the so-called instigators. You're watching Newsfeed AM, and I'm still in conversation with Parliament's Chair of Chairs, Cedric Frolick, who's talking to us from Gqeberha. Mr. Frolick, I hope you're still with us, and let's pick up on the issue of the instigators. The public has been told by the ministers in the security cluster that 12 people are in their sights. So far, we only have about 4 or 6, whichever number you choose to go with, that are now in police custody. Have you asked why we do not have the so-called 12 dirty dozen in police cells right now?
Tony, may I say that the Portfolio Committee on Police in KwaZulu-Natal when they were there. I unfortunately was not part of the briefing that took place there. They received a thorough briefing from the police, and those are probably some of the questions that came up. I must also register my surprise that these people have been in the sight of the security service for some time, and there has no further arrests that has taken place. And this is part of the answers that I think not only the committee will delve into to get from the police, but also the public is waiting to hear. It is impossible that when you have people in your sight who cause such mayhem, that have basically brought the economy of two provinces and the livelihoods of people to a standstill, and they still remain in sight, but they can't be apprehended as suspects so that they can be put through the necessary processes. So those are the type of questions that I'm referring to, that we require answers on. That process will take place from tomorrow afternoon when the Portfolio Committee on Police, together with the NCOP committee, will be meeting, and those are some of the issues that will be dealt with.
Mr. Frolick, before we continue our conversation, which we are wrapping up shortly, I'd just like you to have a listen to Dumiseni Ntuli. He is the KZN ANC secretary last week. I asked him specifically about the gentleman who coincidentally is going to be appearing in court today, Ngizwe Mchunu, probably the most significant of those who have been arrested thus far. Just have a listen to what I said to him. What do you know of his links to ANC structures in Kenya?
It's a joke. It's a joke. I mean, look, the role that Ngizwe Mchunu really has played in this, in terms of our understanding. Firstly, he has absolutely no influence in the African National Congress. I don't even know if he's a member. I don't even know if he's a member of the ANC. He doesn't participate in any of our structures, as far as I know. If he has been involved, it may be in a certain branch somewhere where he has no prominence whatsoever in any region or even in the province in KwaZulu-Natal.
Mr. Frolick, are police officers, as led by the people who lead them, are they deliberately going after insignificant people? You've heard Dumiseni Ntuli. I'm not putting words in his mouth. He says it's a joke, the fellow who's going to be appearing in court today, that he is seen as an instigator.
Well, I cannot comment on that because I don't have any information around that with certain Mr. Ntuli and who the police are going after. But obviously, it is important that those type of issues is dealt with, it's clarified. And if it is that certain people are getting arrested and there's no litigation process that led to what has taken place, then that will be exposed during the normal court processes. However, I understand where your questions are pointing towards to. And my point is that the mere fact that we have not seen any further action of other 12 people that were under the sight of the police being taken against them is of great concern. And that is why we have set up these processes so that we can get right into the depth of what has occurred.
Mr. Frolick, let me get away from the unrest for a moment. We are wrapping up. Last two questions, please. Have you raised...
Yes, I do. Collie, I do have another interview that is pending. You were supposed to have me only for 8 minutes.
Indeed.
I'm on your...
I'm wrapping up. I promise. Two questions and we're done. Have you raised an issue with the president, who is sitting with a finalized SIU report whose weight might see a sitting health minister at a time like this implicated in corruption? Have you raised that with the president?
So in terms of parliamentary protocol, we don't have that type of line directly to the president to ask him that. That is a process where the president said that if asked the SIU to do the investigation and the report has been handed over to him. That is a matter that we are awaiting for the president to pronounce upon. So more than that, I cannot say. I do not have personal discussions with the president.
But you do have the deputy president, whose role is that of government business leader in parliament. Where is he? Could that be the person you are liaising with, or you should be liaising with?
Well, there is an Office of the Leader of Government Business. We know that the Deputy President has been indisposed for some time, and he also required medical treatment. These are the type of issues that is usually pursued by the relevant portfolio committees, and that is something that belongs in the ambit of the Portfolio Committee on Health. Currently, there's an acting minister who is doing very well, and there's nothing further for me to add on this specific topic.
Cedric Frolick, thank you very much for your time, sir. Chair of Chairs in Parliament.